Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, December 2nd, and Matt Hoey is here with us. Welcome back, Matt.
Thanks, Dima.
Let's get started, Matt, with what's going on in Syria right now.
Mm.
I had I had few interviews with a reporter in the southern Lebanon. He has mentioned that how important Syria has been during the conflict between Israel and Lebanon, in terms of not just militarily, but in terms of medical care and all of this assistance that they've given to Lebanon. Right now, do you think is that how important is Syria in your opinion in the eyes of Israelis and the way that they're and how do you see the conflict? Is that connected to the mindset of Israelis?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, Nima. And we spoke just last Friday morning, and I don't think either of us had an appreciation for what was really occurring in Syria, how big the attack was. That this was coordinated with the Syrian National Army, which is a Turkish-backed, opposition. To call it that, that's what seems easy to call these guys opposition, even though it's much more complicated than that. And it's interesting too, right? In the last weekend, over the weekend, I'm sure you saw this. I'm sure the folks who are watching saw as well. All these old ghouls, all these old, all the people from 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago who were wrong and terrible about Syria, who we hope we never see commenting ever again. They've all reappeared, like this, on my Twitter feed or my X feed. It's like I'm reliving 2013, with some of these people who are popping back up with their attestations and their analysis and their commentary on Syria. That is just, horrific. Again, this idea of like it's their opposition. I heard one guy, even Nima, talking about, this was on Al Jazeera. Heard one guy talking about how Hayat Tahrir Sham, HTS, which is the main Salafist jihadist organization, the organization that has taken Aleppo, moving south to Homs, that they practice constrained jihadism. I mean, just absolute nonsense. Anyway. But to your question, I wanted to get that off my chest, so you can tell I'm annoyed by it. But this is very important to the Israelis, and the way I see this is we've talked about this before, right? The idea that Israel is facing the axis of resistance, facing 6, 7 different adversaries essentially, and it's better for Israel to take them apart one by one than to face them united. And that's what we've seen. You've seen the Israelis, while they have not destroyed the Palestinian spirit or desire or will for resistance, they certainly have degraded Hamas's military capabilities in terms of being able to conduct operations like October 7th in the short term. Hamas will be able to rebuild to get back to where they were, but in the immediate, I think the Israelis feel confident that they've reduced Hamas's ability to do such things. They've done the same with Hezbollah, whether it was they actually militarily degraded them, which I think is probably not the case, but certainly politically they were able to force a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah that takes Hezbollah out of the situation for now. So now moving on to Syria. I mean, so you just basically see Israel taking on one at a time, got into a position with Iran where essentially they've checkmated one another, where the idea of destroying each other's cities with missiles is rightfully unappealing to both sides. So they've both pulled back. The rhetoric is all there. The posturing is all there. The danger of it is still there. I hope no one gets me wrong thinking that we're clearing out and away from the danger of a massive regional war. We're not. But you see the Israeli strategy here in terms of going after one member of the axis of resistance at a time, playing out quite well for them. And of course, this was the dilemma that Iran has been in over the last several months. This idea that they can either continue this fight against Israel, where they may not be in the best position to do so, but they have to in order to support their allies, or see their allies picked apart one by one, as we've seen with Hamas and PIJ, Hezbollah, and now certainly Syria is off balance. This last week in Syria is the biggest event in Syria in years. And HTS has taken Aleppo, something that was never accomplished by these opposition Salafist, jihadist, Turkish-backed forces. So this is a big deal. It also puts into question, too, overall Turkey's role in this and how important Turkey is. And this morning, I did hear that the Syrian National Army, which is the rebranding of the Free Syria Army, which is, the Turkish-backed, very overt. The Turks back HTS as well, just a lot more quietly, not as overtly. The Syrian National Army is Turkish. There's no doubt about it. But we reports this morning I saw with that the Syrian National Army had taken Kurdish positions. So you see the role in Turkey in this in terms of trying to get something out of it for themselves. So allowing HTS to go on this offensive, which helps Israel. But the bigger thing for Turkey is that this allows Syrian National Army and potentially HTS as well to take Kurdish positions, weakening the Kurds. Because for the Turks, it's all about the Kurds, right? So this certainly is complex. This is the great game, if you will, at play. What we witnessed in the last decade in horrific fashion, where 500,000, 600,000 were killed, millions upon millions made refugees and displaced, the nation completely destroyed, all for this type of geopolitical chessboard, real life game of risk conduct by the nations of the region, as well as the United States, Russia, and others.
How do you see the role of the Biden administration in the situation that we're witnessing right now in the Middle East? Are they trying to do something? Are they trying to, I don't know, to talk with the parties involved in the conflict?
I think
At
they're
least
doing.
with Turkey, they can talk with Turkey.
They should be able to talk with the Turks, but the Turks are going to do their own thing. And the Americans aren't going to do anything to really restrain the Turks. We certainly didn't restrain the Turks in the prior decade, that during the Syrian war, and the Turks were carrying out proxy operations using HTS, previously Al Nusra, and other Islamist, jihadist, Salafist terror groups, essentially, to achieve their aims. And that melded with America's goal in Syria to destroy the Syrian government, remove Assad and his people from power in order to hurt Iran in the American view, but also to help Israel in the sense of providing that, disallowing that connection between Iran, Iraq, and Syria with Hezbollah, which would then weaken Hezbollah, of course. But I think, as we said before, the priority for Israel is the Palestinians. And so it was not always this is for somehow, even though Hamas and the other Sunni factions of the Palestinians were aligned against Assad's government. And this gets very confusing and very complicated and doesn't make sense, and things get turned upside down real quick. The Israelis still saw the Sunni Islamist forces, for which the Israelis, there's a lot of evidence that the Israelis were backing in Syria, including a former Mossad chief. I think you showed the clip last time we were on. I was on with you, right? The former Mossad chief talking about how, we help the Al-Qaeda guys. We give them medical aid and everything else. If he's admitted to that, he's not admitting to all the other things they help them with. But the idea being that even though that they were aligned with Hamas nominally, that it would hurt Hezbollah, which their big fear with Hezbollah is, as we've seen in the last year, that Hezbollah can put pressure on them, the Israelis, to prevent them from doing to the Palestinians what they want. And of course, we've seen that play out over the last year. And now the Israelis have removed Hezbollah from the situation. They've moved on to trying to remove Syria from the situation. The Americans love it because the Americans are just obsessed with Iran. And this is, we talked about it again last time, I think, no better proof than this, than what Michael Vickers, who was the head of special operations and low intensity conflict for the United States under Barack Obama's administration, said in a Washington Post op-ed in 2017, I believe, that the best chance to hurt Iran was to destroy Syria. Right. So it's not even about Syria for any of these nations that are involved. It's about other other desires, other goals, other interests, other nations. And the Syrian people, much like how the Ukrainian people are being destroyed because of the US and the Brits and NATO's desire to hurt Russia, the same thing happened in Syria. And now we're seeing this played out again, where you're not seeing the desire of the West and regional actors in Syria and Israel is not about what occurs to Syria, what occurs to the Syrian people, but what effects they have on other nations that Israel, other nations and other groups that Israel, the U.S., the Turks, the Gulf states, etc., want to see happen.
Matt, there was an interview with Israel's Channel 2. It was an Israeli scholar of Arab culture, an ex-military intelligence lieutenant. His name is Mordechai Kedar. And he said that he's connected with these people, with these opposition groups and with these Syrian rebels. He's connected with them, that they want to have a better relationship with Israel.
Yeah.
They want to put Israeli embassy in Beirut and in Syria. Do you think that in the mind of Israelis, it's unbelievable if they think that way? And because it's unbelievable, it's impossible to go in that direction. How is that possible to think that way?
They take the mindset, Nima, of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, which is something that people do in their own personal lives, let alone nation states over the course of humanity. The Israelis have long done this. When I was in Iraq back in 2004, 2005, I used to go up to Sulmania a lot, an Iraqi Kurdish province. And there was this brand new airport in Sulmania at that point. And I said, who built this? Where did this come from? And they said the Israelis built it because the Israelis wanted to use the Kurds against the Iranians, right? As well as to have a check against the Turks and against the Iraqis as well, the Syrians, of course. But you've seen for a long time, the Israelis, like the Americans, of course, I mean, with the Kurds, as far as I know, maybe even before this, the United States first started supplying weapons to the Kurds in 1973, the year I was born. So Nixon and Kissinger start sending weapons to the Kurds to destabilize the Iraqi government, in 51 years ago. And it probably predates that. That's probably just the limits of my knowledge on it. But you see these machinations, again, this great game, these imperial Machiavellian designs played out throughout the region that have certainly plenty of predecessors and antecedents in terms of historical actions, but we see it playing out now. And this thought somehow that the Israelis have that they're going to use HTS and these other jihadist forces for their own benefit, and that somehow it's going to work out exactly. It says all we got to need to do is give these guys some guns, some intelligence, soften up the Syrians by bombing them, and then when they take over, they're going to bend to our will, and they're going to do exactly as we say because they're going to owe us, and on and on and on. Except that the big thing is the enemy that linked you guys is now gone, and now you go back to and then alone this ahistorical thinking that somehow you can control these groups, that somehow they don't have their own agency, that somehow they don't really believe what they attest to, what they say they do. And you see this, of course, no better example than HTS itself, right? And Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda, right? And where did Al-Qaeda come from? Let alone the Islamic State, which was previously Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And where did Al-Qaeda in Iraq come from? And of course, going all the way back to, Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda as a creation of American and Saudi and Pakistani intelligence services. I mean, so these nations keep playing with these Frankenstein's monsters that, and thinking that somehow the result is going to be different. But that's because of their arrogance. That's because of their entitlement. That's because of their belief that they are makers of history. And so the Israelis are as bad as the Americans in this. I mean, America is the imperial power of the world, but in the region, Israel is the imperial power. So they have the same mindset, and it's a colonial settler mindset. And people are familiar with the whole thinking behind Zionism, Greater Israel Project. So these people think that they can, like on a chessboard, they're all acolytes of Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger, and they think that this is the way to move forward, even in spite of the fact that history tells them otherwise. So yeah, I had seen that interview, and I think what the idea was, we're going to give them guns and they're going to give us an embassy in Damascus or something like that. And it's just incredible. It's absolutely incredible that here we are again, witnessing this occurring in Syria, which we spent the better part of a decade watching in horror. And I don't understand. I don't know where it goes, or certainly it's been less than a week, this operation by HTS and the Syrian National Army, and so it's hard to get a handle on the wherewithal of both of those forces and what they can actually accomplish, as well as what can the Syrians do to oppose them. What will the Russians do? Vladimir Putin today said Syria has all the support that Russia can give it. Of course, the Iranians and the Iraqis have pledged their support. Hezbollah is moving their forces back into Syria. But one of the things I think that is curious, not curious, but people have to look at and say, what the heck were the Syrians thinking? And I understand the reality, the reasons for why Idlib province existed. And Idlib is in the very northwest of Syria, bordering on Turkey. And that's where these jihadist forces, these Al-Qaeda remnants, had been contained. And as this, essentially they'd all been sent there. So this is one big jihadist camp, essentially, Idlib. And they have been allowed to be there for years, with their back door being Turkey. And this is why Turkey has such a key role in regards to HTS and these other forces, because the Turks controlled that border. The Turks controlled everything that got into Idlib. So basically, these forces were dependent upon Turkey, and they already had the relationship, they already had the association, but Turkey had this leverage over them, still does. But over this last year, they've been training, they've been organizing, they've been growing, very reminiscent of where Al-Qaeda in Iraq comes from. It comes to the Islamic State, because the United States and Iraq put all these guys together in Camp Bucca. And of course, they talked and they coordinated and they worked with each other, and they became this very strong force. And so, is that what happened here? And so, what's the real strength of this? Where is going to go? Will the Syrians be able to repel them, take back Aleppo, et cetera, et cetera? It's all things we'll have to wait and see. But I don't think anybody had this on their card for what was going to be happening in the region. I don't recall any analysts talking about a re-engagement of the Syrian civil war in a way very serious. I think comments on Syria seem to be all related to essentially that the Israelis and the Americans are all going to continue to bomb them, and so on and so forth. And it would be mainly interdiction efforts by the Israelis against resupply of Hezbollah. And that was what's the next 6 months, year was going to play out. And so I think this is very surprising. I don't know of anyone who predicted it. I know there was reports about a month or so ago, saying that Assad's forces, the Syrian government forces, may have tried to push into Idlib, to take out some of these HTS forces. But, that certainly is not what we got. And so I think everybody is still surprised and trying to figure out what happens next.
Yeah, it seems that it was a surprise attack, Matt. And right now, the question is, are they capable of keeping the situation the same way that it is right now? And on the other hand, if you remember, before 2020, there was a critical situation in Syria. And in 2020, they've reached an agreement, a ceasefire agreement between the government in Syria and these people in these rebellions.
Right.
Do you think that the situation
with the Russians were the principal, principal,
and there was an agreement between Iran, Russia, and Turkey,
right,
about having some sort of demilitarized zone in Idlib and Aleppo. And right now, do you think the situation is more critical than it was before 2020, or is the same way in the eyes of the Syrian government?
I think it's more critical for the region because of the events of the last year. So this is just one the new phase of this regional war. We talk a lot about like being worried about the regional war, and essentially we're in this regional war. But I think when we say we're worried, what we're worried about is a mass regional war. Cities being leveled, that type of thing. I think this is. I think because of everything that has led us to this point over this last year, we certainly are in a different spot than we were 4 years ago. I'll be interested to see what Israel does next. What Israel certainly with the ceasefire in Lebanon, which they violated some 50 times over the weekend or whatever. But I mean, their goal is clear, I think, to keep Lebanon out of their war with the Palestinians, and that this action in Syria does the same. Okay, so now what are they going to do about Yemen, and what are they going to do about? I don't think they'll do anything about Iraq, because I think the Americans control Iraq to a degree. Yes, the Iranians may control the political system, but America controls its economic system. If people aren't familiar with it, the United States controls essentially the Iraqis' monetary reserves. So we essentially control Iraq because of that. Their money is in our bank in New York, and that's the way it is. I think the Israelis are comfortable with that the Iraqis won't do much of anything other than, the Islamic resistance of Iraq, sending rockets and drones and missiles like they have over the last year. But, that's not a big issue. What will the Israelis do about Yemen is another thing, because they are still blockading the Red Sea. It's causing a lot of problems, has been causing a lot of problems for the last year. I mean, their major southern port, Eilat, shut down, went bankrupt. I mean, Israel's economy is having all kinds of problems. I saw numbers last week that Israel's exports, both their exports and imports, have dropped about 35% over the last year. That's a horrific punch in the gut for the Israeli economy. And as we all know, the Israeli economy is bleeding out anyway. So what will Israel do about Yemen, I think, is what will occur next. And we'll see. I mean, Yemen poses a much greater challenge for the Israelis and for the Americans by extension. Whenever I say the Israelis, I think people understand that connotates the Americans as well. What will be done about Yemen? I mean, certainly the United States Navy has failed in its mission over the last year. They lost the biggest, as the U.S. Navy likes to say, the biggest naval battle since World War II. Well, guess what? The U.S. Navy lost it. And what will be done there to try and get Yemen, Ansar Allah, the Houthis, to relent and to give up their blockade. They're not going to do that until they're either forced to do it, which I don't know how it's possible, or the genocide in Gaza stops.
And the question is, Matt, the backers of the government in Syria are Iran and Russia. Russia is involved right now in the conflict in Ukraine. How, in your opinion, how is the conflict in Ukraine is the conflict in Ukraine connected with what's going on in Syria or not? Because we've learned from various reports recently, we had the Ukrainian intelligence being in that region helping these groups. How is that related to the conflict? The conflict in Ukraine is related to the conflict in Syria.
Right, and we've seen reports of Ukrainian intelligence in Africa aligning with Salafist, jihadist, Islamist forces in Africa to try and go after Russian forces that are in Africa, primarily Wagner forces. And of course, we have to remember, go back to March, it was when you had that horrific attack on the concert hall in Moscow, that the Russians said this was Ukrainian intelligence behind this Islamic State attack. And so you see this relationship that exists with the Ukrainians, with these various Islamist forces throughout the world, the Middle East, Central Asia, as well then Africa. And that, of course, is right out of the American playbook. The relationship between the United States and these type of forces is well known. It goes back decades. It was certainly there in Syria. The evidence for that is overwhelming. Essentially, you've had people such as President Obama and the former Secretary of State John Kerry say it out loud. I think Joe Biden said it as well at one time. that this is what was occurring there, as well as plenty of people who could speak to it, including leaked defense intelligence agency documents. I had a friend of mine talk to me about it who was at DIA at the time. This was summer of 2012. This is what we're doing. We're trying to use these guys to overthrow Assad. It's going to blow up in our faces. And it did. So certainly the relationship between the American intelligence services and the Ukrainian intelligence services, it's father-son type of relationship. So the fact that you see this Ukrainian involvement should not be a surprise. And it makes sense. I mean, it does make sense. If Ukraine is in this war against Russia, Russia has these interests and these outposts and these exposures, ability to be exposed outside of Russia itself, then Ukraine should try and take advantage of it. That just kind of seems what any nation would attempt to do. But the reality is, who is Ukraine aligning themselves with? It speaks volumes as to actually who the Ukrainians themselves are. So not surprised at all to see that there's potential or that there is Ukrainian involvement in this. Again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. But also too, it tracks with what we have seen. I'm sorry, hang on a second. Okay, sorry, something popped up on my screen. But there's also tracks with how the Americans do business for decades in terms of going after their enemies using these, again, Frankenstein monsters. And so I think Ukraine is probably a lot, and I should say probably, Ukraine is a lot less vulnerable, though, to the blowback of working with these forces in Central Asia, in the Middle East, and in Africa than the United States is. So I think the Ukrainians feel quite confident in continuing that relationship.
Do you think that in Syria right now, is the government? How much are they? How much do they need the support coming from Russia? Because we know Russia is totally involved in the conflict in Ukraine, and they're so busy there, and because they're fighting everybody there. Right now, how much do they need Russian army on their part right now? We know that Iranian are sending troops, not Iranian troops are sending their forces, the Iranian backed forces to Syria right now. But how much Russia is involved there right now?
I think the biggest thing of support that the Syrians will likely be looking for from the Russians is, logistics support, supply, particularly, munitions, oil, fuel, as well as intelligence support. And those are things that the Russians likely can give them. Certainly in terms of making sure that these cadres that are coming from Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Yemen, wherever they're going to be coming from, Lebanon, of course, have the ammunition they need, have the fuel for their vehicles, have the batteries for their radios, and so forth. The Russians can provide that. I think everyone understands the strength of the Russian economy, particularly its military industrial base. It can provide those things. Whether or not the Russians can provide, I know I said intelligence before, but can dedicate intelligence assets to the Syrians like they did previously to help these forces engage with the opposition, as well as then to provide the air support. I don't know if Russia has the attack aircraft and the attack helicopters available to provide to Syria like they did in the previous iteration of the war. I simply don't know. And that would be a huge, huge loss to the Syrians not to have that air support, particularly as you see the ability of HTS and the Syrian National Army to move in open columns down the road. These are the videos you're seeing. You're saying, where the heck is the air? Where are the attack aircraft? Where are the attack helicopters? So that might be something that they don't have. The intelligence, again, the ISR, the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets may be much more limited than previously. But I think in terms of providing the weapons, the ammunition, the batteries, the fuel, etc., that the Syrians will need to fight this, that shouldn't be a problem from the Russians.
Matt, whenever we talk about Donald Trump, is people are talking about that he's unpredictable. Right
Mhm.
now, the situation with Erdogan in Turkey right now, do you think that he's unpredictable in term? Because recently he was talking about the situation in, if you remember, before Israel attacking Lebanon, he said if they go there, I'll send my army
Right.
to help Hezbollah. But he didn't do anything at the end of the day. Right now, he knows how important Syria is for Lebanon and how important Lebanon is for the conflict in Gaza. And why he has decided to do this right now. It's unbelievable. I
Because
cannot
he's,
understand.
yeah, he sees the advantage with the Kurds. He sees the advantage. This is a
But
chance to weaken the Kurds. Yeah, I think that's it. He puts his priorities over the priorities of the. I think he expects his political base to be supportive, that his nationalist Turkish base to be supportive of this because it goes after the Kurds. And it's nice to talk about the Palestinians. It's nice to talk about the Lebanese. It's nice to speak against the Israelis, and it sounds good, and the rhetoric is terrific, and everyone likes it. But the reality is the Kurds are the most important thing for the Turks, and I think this is ultimately what's attempted to be accomplished there. I think, who knows, maybe, I don't know if the Turks expected HTS to seize Aleppo. They probably didn't care. All they wanted was a distraction, a big show to allow the Syrian National Army to move into Kurdish positions. And like I said, out of this morning, they've done that. So we'll see how the Kurds react, and then of course we'll see how the Americans react. But the only thing the Americans care about is, well, Americans are a little different, I think, in the sense that we will prioritize Israel over everything. We'll prioritize Israel over our own country. Seeing that, I mean, go a few hours east, or excuse me, a few hours west from where I live, and we've got about a $35 billion, $40 billion unpaid bill to repair and rebuild and reconstruct after Hurricane Helena, and no one knows who's going to pay it. But we're going to send another however many billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars to Israel in the next fiscal year. The $23 billion that we provided this past year, it'll be at least that much, maybe more. So the Americans will do everything to help Israel, but then also too, they are obsessed with Iran. Particularly some of the people coming in the Trump administration, as well as some people in the Biden administration. So the idea that, how will the United States respond to their Kurdish allies being attacked will be viewed through the prism of what's best for Israel, and does this hurt Iran? And so, we'll have to, I think, wait and see what the Americans do.
do you think that Donald Trump's presidency would bring new assassinations to the region?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think so. I think so. I think both. I think, one, the people he's got coming in, Tulsi Gabbard at DNI, she has spoken fondly of assassinations before, primarily drone strikes. And I don't know enough about John Ratcliffe. I think I just don't know enough about him at CIA. He's probably going to do whatever the CIA people want to do, and CIA special operations, they're paramilitary folks. This is their life. This is what they live for. So that's what they're going to be pushing for. I think you have plenty within the Trump administration who, they you look at a Mike Waltz and a Sebastian Gorka, who's incoming national security advisor and a deputy national security advisor, and how they talk, how they speak. Gorka hasn't done anything with his life that seems to have anything to do with the real world that I can tell. But Waltz certainly has. Waltz was an American Special Forces operation, a number of deployments. He does know what he's talking about. But he is a fantasist. He's a fabulist. His view of the world is it's imperial, to say the least. And in others like Marco Rubio, who's taken over the State Department, when his comments regarding Israel's pager and beeper and walkie-talkie attacks back in September, was it, in Lebanon, he was talking about it like he had just seen an episode or scene from James Bond, and how great this was, right? Or this was wow, did you read that? I just read this chapter in his latest Tom Clancy novel, and holy cow, that's how these people think. And so I think you have people like Rubio and Gorka who believe that stuff. Waltz, who is a creature of this, and then others like Ratcliffe taking over CIA, who I can't speak that much about him, except I get the feeling that he's going to let the CIA do whatever they want to do. And then Trump is the most malleable president we've ever had. And they're going to go in and they're going to talk to him, and he's going to believe that this stuff is going to work. And the problem, Mr. President, why it didn't work in your last administration when we were doing these assassinations in Iran all the time, so we just didn't do enough of them, and, you were dead right, Mr. President, to kill Qasem Soleimani. The problem is we didn't kill more. We just didn't do enough of it. We didn't kill enough, right? On and on and on. And I think that's what we're looking at in a lot of ways with this Trump administration. But again, who knows? He's unpredictable. This is why, reportedly the Russians, not reportedly, Vladimir Putin said it at one point back in February or March, and in other, sources coming out of Russia, why the Russians favored Joe Biden, even though he was so antagonistic in Europe, even though he was, dead set on this war in Ukraine, willing to go up to the line of nuclear war over it. The Russians at least felt he was predictable. And with Trump, they can't predict what he's going to do. And I think that's how most of the world feels about him.
Matt,
with the exception of the Israelis. The Israelis, I was just in Palestine, as we talked about, and the Israelis absolutely love Donald Trump. We had a soldier at one point get on our van at a checkpoint, and when he got off, big smile on his face, and he said, "Make America great again with Trump." And you saw that over and over again. The Israelis, they love Trump in a way that you can't appreciate unless you're there.
Matt, you've heard about a new type of bomb that Israelis are using in Gaza. It seems that it makes a terrifying sound, and I've heard about it. The Ministry of Health in Gaza says that anybody near to 200 and 300 meter to this attack, to this bomb, is going to be vaporized. And do you think Israelis are making, or I don't know, are they trying to make a new experiment in Gaza with these new bombs? And what do we know about this new bomb? Have you heard about it?
Yeah, I saw the press release on it. I haven't seen any analysts or experts say what they think it is. In my mind, I think it might be a fuel air explosive, but I don't know. But the Israelis forever have been using the Palestinians as lab rats. One of the best writers on this for people to read about this phenomenon of using the Palestinians, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank, as experimental subjects for these weapons tests, is a guy named Anthony Lowenstein. People should look up his work. He's written a couple books on this. He is probably the most informed person I know in the sense of understanding how Israel uses Palestine as a weapons laboratory. They also use it in other ways too. They use it for commercial purposes. When I was just there in Palestine, had a gentleman who was involved in the IT community in Palestine explaining how sometimes the Israelis will push technologies into Palestine, commercial technologies, cell phone technologies, say, switchboards and things like that, to test them in a live setup. And get all the bugs worked out. Does this thing really work? What we'd have to do to fix it, using it in a real world setting, because they've got the Palestinians captive as their lab rats. So both with weapons and commercial purposes, they use the Palestinians as test subjects to better their products that they then turn around and sell to the world. So I don't know if that's the case with this weapon system, or if it's actually a weapon system that the Israelis are just deploying for the first time. But I'm not certain what it is. I haven't seen any experts. If people in the comments have seen it, it'd be helpful if you throw it in there. If people have seen stuff in terms of what this might actually be. But, it's not surprising to hear this, that you're seeing experimental weapons used against the Palestinians, because that's what the Israelis have been doing for years and years and years.
That is, when you look at the conflict in Gaza, and if you consider what has happened during the last 12 months, The conflict in Gaza, then they started with Lebanon, Iran, and right now in Syria. It seems that they're doing each and everything at their disposal to distract us, to distract everybody from what's going on in
Mm,
Gaza.
right.
And what do we know about the situation in Gaza right now?
Oh, it's hard to say. It's been 400 days, and the situation's worse than it's been. So this genocide just continues to evolve. Uh, I heard this morning that 200 people have been killed in Gaza in airstrikes on Saturday alone. I mean, the targeting of on Saturday that the Israelis killed one of the chief medical officers, one of the top surgeons in Gaza, assassinated him, and the next day they assassinated the man who runs a large soup kitchen, a large food, So I mean, they're deliberately targeting those who are not opposing them, but are trying to keep Palestinians alive. And we've seen this. They killed another journalist again from Al Quds network yesterday, I believe it was. So, I mean, you're seeing the continued destruction of a people and focusing on destroying those who are trying to save the people, as well as destroying those who are trying to tell about this. I mean, so when I was at the Gaza border, this was 2 weeks ago today. We were a couple kilometers from where the built-up area of northern Gaza would be, and you couldn't see anything. It kind of plays tricks on you because 2 kilometers, 2.5 kilometers to where that is, and you should be able really to see the buildings quite well, and they weren't there. I mean, the whole thing's been leveled. And you go back and you find other photos to make sure what you were looking at was kind of what you were looking at, and you realize what you'd seen was just this destruction in Gaza. What we could see was we didn't witness any airstrikes or anything like that while we were there. There was smoke from burning and whatever that was burning, whether it be a house, a apartment building, a mosque, a school, whatever. There were pillars of smoke, but for the most part, what we saw were these huge clouds of dust that were most likely from the Israeli earth-moving equipment. Maybe their tanks and armored vehicles moving around, but it was so concentrated, so heavy that this looks like, as they make or remake Gaza in their image, using that earth-moving equipment to carry out the next phase of their genocide. So as we continue to see the destruction of the people, we continue to get more information about how widespread the deliberate destruction has been. There's a United Nations report that came out late last week that detailed a lot of the destruction. For instance, 70% of agricultural land has been destroyed in Gaza. 83% of plant life has been destroyed in Gaza. I mean, that goes for anything you can think of. The Israelis, that's anything you can think of that supports a society. The Israelis have deliberately destroyed it. And so I think this next phase then is essentially what we're seeing with that earth moving equipment, separating, continuing to really define that separation between North and Central Southern Gaza. And the people in the North in the last 5 weeks, 6 weeks, maybe longer, under the general's plan, as it's called, named after retired General Island, giving the options of surrender or starve, or essentially get out of here or starve to death. Also, a lot of targeted killing, a lot of wholesale just killing of groups of people, making it impossible to live in northern Gaza, trying to get people pushed out. And those that do remain in northern Gaza will be put into essentially concentration camps. We've seen the reporting already about how American companies, Israeli companies will come in and administer these camps. The mercenaries, these development organizations that are, nothing more than war enablers. They will come in and backfill the IDF, and these people will be in concentration camps, and they'll be able to leave. They'll never be able to come back. The camps will be utterly horrific. They will be starved to death inside those camps. It'll be so miserable. And of course, the violence will continue. The idea being eventually they will leave. And then, of course, the settlers will come in. And Danielle Weiss, who is a prominent settler in Israel, maybe the most prominent, she has already said that she's got 750 families lined up to move into Gaza this year. And in south of Gaza, I think the Israelis just essentially will continue what they're doing. And they'll continue bombing the hell out of it, starving it, Anyone tries to get the water system back up and running, they'll kill them. But I think the Israeli mindset towards the millions that will be in southern Gaza, the 1.8, 1.9 million, however many are left in the central and southern Gaza, we'll worry about them later. We'll figure something out. Maybe something will come along and the Egyptians will open their border, or the Jordanians will take them, or all these ships will show up and take them to South America. I think the Israelis essentially, we're going to figure that out later. But from that next part, we're going to do what we're going to do with Gaza: concentration camps, money making, for these companies, and resettlement. And then, of course, they've gotten Hezbollah off their northern border now. Hopefully, the idea being Netanyahu can campaign then on, look, we defeated Hezbollah, we killed Nasrallah, we forced Hezbollah to back beyond the river. Our people were able to go back to the north. This is a victory, because people remember back in the summer when Israel was beginning its operations against Lebanon, this was something that was prominently said by the Israeli government. We are going to this is a goal of the war now. We are linking Lebanon to Palestine, to Gaza, and that goal of this war is to get our people back into their homes in northern Israel. And it looks as if the Israelis may be able to do that. So a big political win for Netanyahu, a big domestic win for Netanyahu. And certainly the Israelis will do as they want in southern Lebanon. Again, as I said before, they've already violated the ceasefire like 50 times, and we can expect that to occur. And essentially what southern Lebanon will look like, some people will be allowed to come back, but it will be, I think, mainly depopulated and in many ways a free fire zone for the Israelis. And what has Hezbollah recovers from this, how they move forward with this. I'd like to think that Hezbollah's taking of the ceasefire, accepting of this ceasefire is a necessary strategic pause for them, that along with the Iranians and the others, they've said, okay, let's pull back for a moment. We're overextended here. The Israelis are beating up really badly on us one at a time. Let's figure out how to go forward with this. I'd like to think that's what's occurring there, as opposed to Hezbollah just having to say, you know what, this is politically not possible for us. We cannot subject our people to this destruction for the sake of another people. Militarily, we've been degraded. Our command and control is worse than we let on. The Israeli attacks really did have an effect on us. Hopefully that's not the case, but you have to consider that may have been the case. And now, of course, with this weakening of the Syrians, Israel is in a pretty good position regionally. They got to figure out what to do with Yemen. They're in a checkmate situation with Iran. But, again, they've got the Americans to control the Iraqis. Israel is in a pretty good place regionally, much better than, if you rewind us back 4 weeks or so, Nima, and hear what I said, certainly I wasn't getting any of this correct. I don't think none of us were getting any of this correct in terms of where the Israelis were heading with their strategy. So, maybe I'm misreading this, and, I think that's what we're looking at here, a situation in the region dramatically different than it was just a few weeks ago.
Thank you so much, Matt, for being with us today. Great pleasure.
Thank you, Nima.